Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Reading, Writing, and Ralph. It is a great evening tonight. It's going to be a good episode to end November. We have the Fiction Writers Forum tonight with Ralph Peluso, of course, and authors Ceil Warren and Stuart McCusker. Now, you guys have probably seen them before. If you have been following the show, we are super excited to have them back on. We will be discussing all things fiction tonight. Rebecca Rose was originally in the lineup. She could not make it tonight. So we are wishing the best for her, but it's still going to be a fun evening nonetheless. Before we invite everyone on, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love Fund. As I've said it before, it is an amazing community assistance fund. If you're going to give to any nonprofit or charity of your choice this Christmas season, holiday season, this season of giving, please consider Kathleen and Eddie Arthur Hearts of Love. They're an Act for Alexandria affiliate. I'm going to put their link up right now, and I will also put it in the comments, arthurheartsoflove.org. So again, great community fund. Consider giving to them this Christmas season. I'm going to bring Ralph on so we can discuss tonight's lineup. Hi, Ralph. How are you?
Great, Grace. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited for this episode. We're going to end November with a bang.
Actually, it's the year. There's no shows in December, so we're taking
There are no
a little
shows
time
in
off.
December. Well,
So
you have a show of a different sort coming up this weekend.
that's right. It's 3 more performances of The Trial of Ebenezer Scrooge, and it's at the Riverfront Theater in Milford, Delaware, which is not too far from Rehoboth Beach. So if anybody's in the area, you might be able to get a ticket. But the shows are very close to being sold out. So there's maybe under 10 for each performance available. But if you're there,
Wow,
stop by.
that's great. If anyone wants to
it's a
road
good
trip
story.
with me this weekend. All
Come
right,
on down, Grace. I
wonderful.
got an extra ticket for Saturday night. So
Absolutely, I'll be there. All right, so
all
why don't you
right.
tell us a little bit
All right.
about who will be joining you this evening?
Two not only wonderful authors, but dear friends of mine. One, Stuart McCusker, who I've known 35 years at least. And he wrote a terrific fiction book called Today's Horoscope, Horror. So it's a little bit of a twist on horoscope. And the other author is Ceil Warren, who I've known for nearly twice that time. And she and I grew up together in the Bronx. And she's written 3 books, a series. Her first was Turning Towards the Sun, and the last is When Only Forever After Matters, I think, if I have that right. A wonderful series about this life in a small hamlet and what goes on there, sort of like uh, Peyton Place in a more closely knit community. So kind of interesting stuff. And we're going to talk about approaches and how you get from point A to point B and all things that go into fiction writing.
Wonderful. I'm excited. Fiction writing is one of the things I studied in college. I have an English degree, so I am really excited for this discussion. So I will leave and then I will bring them both on. And we also, to remind everyone, we'll have trivia throughout the evening. I believe we have 3 questions tonight.
Right.
So we'll see if we
And
get through them all. You guys have to answer them, and then we
yeah,
can move on to the next
and
question.
let's encourage the audience to ask questions of any one of the 3 of us, or 4 of us, including you.
Yes, absolutely. All right, I will be here in the background, but I will let you 3 take it away.
Ceil, welcome. How are you?
I'm well, Ralph. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. And Stuart, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing good, thank you.
All right, let's just each of you give a recap of your background and what you've written, so we can get the audience refamiliarized with you. So why don't you start, Ceil?
Okay. So I come from a large family of 8 children, and I grew up in the Bronx, not too far from where Ralph grew up in the Bronx. There was, against all odds, I was able to climb the corporate ladder in AT&T, and with only a high school diploma, and make it to the position of CFO for one of their New York operations. So my years was just knee deep in financial data and analysis and business planning, and I loved it, actually. I mean, my friends made fun of me. They called me a nerd. They said, you crunch numbers for a living and you actually like it. But I did. But so you get to the point in life where you have that $1 million question of what's next. And I'll tell you, aside from the finance portion of it, of my life, in my career, it was my passions were always in the arts. I mean, I was singing 2 choruses, and I dabbled in sketching and took art courses and oil painting and acrylics. And when I was 13, my father and the Beatles, I had to have him teach me how to read music and play the guitar and all different stringed instruments and stuff. But I'll tell you, my love affair in the arts was always the power of the written word. So when I came up to that $1 million question, taking on another career in writing was definitely for me.
As I always tell people, I used to be an accountant, then I got a sense of humor.
Yes, me too.
Stuart, why don't you give everybody your background?
Thank you, Ralph. My background, I have finance in my background as well. Maybe there's a theme here. That should be another book. How we escaped finance and became writers. I grew up in Long Island, New York. Moved to Northern Virginia when I was 11. Went to Virginia Tech, and currently have been working in supply chain for the last 20 years. I lead supply chain for a company called Forever Oceans right now, which is an aquaculture company. We raise, fish farming and offshore markets. And literally, I have always loved books and writing. I thought it would be a $1 question, thinking, well, what am I going to do in this aspect? But I have a huge collection of books, and I just love them. And I like a good laugh as well. So what I thought to do was I would love to write a book. I've only written one, Today's Horoscope. I think it's a pretty book. Obviously we've got titles, and it can show you a copy of it, all of those things. But I always thought it was an interesting thing, a cool thing to write. And you see so many people doing it. I said, you know what? I think I can do this. So I like a good challenge, and it took some time, but I did it, and I'm glad I did, because it opens up a lot of doors. A lot of people want to speak to you about your book, all the above, and I just think it's a great way to leave an impression and a mark. And I think this, fiction is wonderful, because it's really a window to your imagination, and what you can put on paper is yours.
Yeah. So
That's me in a nutshell. There were 6 kids in my family as well. Huge family. Mm-hmm.
So let's start the conversation off with this, because you said something that triggered it. You said imagination. Writing is the window to your imagination. So let me start with, how do you come up with the story that you want to tell? Like the first book I wrote, 512, that started when I was 13, and I finally wrote it when I was 65, right? So and I knew what triggered that event. It was always the debate, who's the greatest player of all time. But where do you come up with your storyline? Ceil, go first.
Well, so I wrote a romantic comedy series, and it's actually an interesting process. And I hadn't really thought about it until you asked the question. I mean, you sent us, what we were going to hope to talk about. Mine started out with just a single image, and I found that the process of peeling back layers Well, in the writing process for me, it is actually wrapping layers in, bringing layers in. So I had this pleasant image of a person walking out of their front door, pajamas, slippers, morning coffee cup in hand, and shuffling over to their bench on their front porch. So then you start asking questions. Well, who is this person? And you start putting your story together, man or woman. I decided a man. How old? I decided a senior aged man. And then you ask, well, what is he doing sitting there? What is he thinking about? And you just keep asking questions until you get enough of a story that it starts coming to life. So it was, it could be anything. I mean, you can create anything from that one little tiny scene. And when you think about it, so I chose that he was going to be fretting about something. Well, what about? I mean, it could have been health. It could have been a business issue. It could have been, anything. So I decided love. Now, right there with that decision, I was going to write a love story. My genre was picked. And so it was, is he fretting about a current love, a forbidden love, an unattainable love? You keep going through the series of questions and putting another layer on. So I chose that Arthur, 62-year-old, fretting about a past love, a former love. So then you start asking all the other questions. Who was this person? Well, I created Anna Felicia, who was a world famous opera singer. But of course, when Arthur met her, she was, a debutante, an up and coming opera singer, so, so now you're starting to get some of the characters going. And this process actually works for anyone. You can start with a single thought or a single image and just keep asking and asking questions. So, of course, now the reader is asking, well, why is he fretting about her? So I created a letter. He hasn't seen her in 40 years. He hasn't talked to her in 40 years. And out of the blue, he receives a letter. So an added layer of intrigue would be that, and he refuses to open the letter. He's afraid of what's in it. Then you ask why, and you just keep asking questions until you actually create a story. And at some point, you have enough of the storyline to put together an outline. And so, Arthur is refusing to open this letter. He's scared to death. And you say, well, what's in this letter? It has to be opened. You can't have a whole book with a letter that's lying on his kitchen table. And so who's going to get him to open it? So then in comes the zany friends. Now, Arthur could have lived anywhere in the world. He could have lived in an inner city neighborhood in the Bronx. He could have lived in a crowded suburban, area in outside of Chicago or Greece or wherever. And so I created this fictitious world of Stone's End. I thought it would be fun to have a microcosm of a little village, which is, nosy people and everybody in your business and everyone knows your business. And you just start developing it from there. But the process actually it works. And I took a master class that actually explained this process, that you actually can start with a single thought or image, and through the layering in of questions, you can create a whole storyline.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you know where you were going to end up, or did you end up by filling in the blanks?
I ended up by filling in the blanks. And I let the story evolve. I let the characters evolve. Now you have to so each question you ask, you actually have to answer the question. And every time you answer the question, you have made a decision about your story. And you have made a decision about your story, your storyline. You made a decision about who your characters were. And I actually do, so when I create my outline, which kind of shifts as the story goes, I also do character profiles. I know my characters so well that if my editor makes a suggestion that this character should say this particular line, in my head I'm saying, no, Arthur would never say that. And I won't put it in, or or he'll make a suggestion like, to enhance the character, which is spot on. But it's so no, I don't know the ending when I start.
Okay. I'm gonna ask the first trivia question, and we'll give the audience the opportunity to pick which book they want. So we'll fill that in at the end, depending on who wins, because we may get a winner who's got your book or Stuart's book, or all of your books, and they may not have my book. So we'll give them a chance to pick from each of us. But anyway, the first trivia question is, how many different types of fiction are there? Question. So, so I'm gonna go, still before I ask you the same question, I'm gonna tell my process for my last book, right? And even for the Babe Ruth book, I knew where I was starting, and I knew what the conclusion was going to be. And I had no idea of the characters, the amount of characters, or what they were going to look like anywhere along the line. But I filled the story in from A to Z, right? So, Stuart, there's the two ends of the table. Ceil does it very methodically, using, a nice formula. I go here and go to Z. You've known me long enough to, that's the way the brain works. What was your process?
Mine was I kind of wanted a message, an unconscious message with the book of the perils of judging, because unfortunately we live in a world where a lot of people judge, and I wanted a funny story to kind of outline that. I mean, my story is about somebody that is making fun of somebody for something, and literally really was judging, and the intent was to have a fun story along the way with why this is not such a good idea to do this thing. So what I did was I had an outline as well, a beginning, a conclusion, and then several pieces of what I wanted to do in there, and then I filled it in almost like if you're building a house. You have a foundation, several floors, and then the roof, the attic, if you will. My story, I wanted it to be fun, funny, but at the same time, the unconscious subject matter of the perils of judging. And is it really that big a deal? So hopefully that was achieved with it. I thought the characters were fun. There were a lot of dialogue that I have heard and seen and used myself along the way. Trying to keep things moving. Again, my book is called Today's Horoscope. Shameless plug. There it is right there. Literally somebody makes fun of somebody who thinks horoscopes are real. And he has the misfortune of insulting somebody who puts a spell on him, and his horoscopes start coming true, and they're not necessarily good. Now there isn't a lot of no one gets permanently injured, but there's a lot of shenanigans along the way. And again, for the process, I kind of thought about, again, there's the old quote, with John Lennon, how you write a song. Think about what you want to say and put a backbeat to it. I kind of wanted some kind of message like that, the perils of judging, and have it a fun way not to do. Plus, try to put something that has not been done before. I don't recall any stories like that. So that was appealing to me, So my process, I was very familiar with all my characters. The book at several levels wrote itself, because it was like, this sounds like fun, and kind of rolled down that avenue. And then again, at the same time, had some ebbs and flows, and of course you've got to tie it up at the end with a conclusion. So that's what I tried to do, and I think I did. So hopefully that answers my process.
Yeah, no, it does. So here's the next question, and I'll go in reverse order. So Stuart, you answer this first. How do you keep the story alive?
You've got to have hooks. You've got to have fun things that make people want to turn the next page and go, "You've got to be kidding! Is that really happening?" You know. And at the same time, I think dialogue is important. If you have people speaking to each other, you know, try to have as much realism in it as you can. And again, from comedy, you know, I think it was pretty funny, and I think that is an excellent hook, which is what I did, or at least I attempted to do.
Yeah, Ceil, you?
It's the same. You do need hooks, and like I said, at some point, you know, I was able to do an outline, and then you actually do an outline where you do know that you're ending, but you have to drop breadcrumbs along the way, or hooks, and you have to be careful to actually write down the breadcrumbs, so when you get to the end, you answer all the little hooks that you've left dangling out there. But you do want to push to make your chapters open, lively, and you do want to put put a focus on having a chapter end with because you know a lot of people, as they're lying in bed and they're going to read another chapter, you know, one, you don't want them to fall asleep, and two, when they end the chapter, you want the reader to say, oh, just one more chapter. So you want to end each chapter with, you know, something that's going to keep the reader turning the pages.
So yeah, so yours kind of had, you know, like romantic suspense to them, right? Each chapter, so that you will look forward to it. Some folks do it more subtly. Stuart does it with humor. What about the writers that use the straight out of left field twist with no kernels and no indications that are coming? And we've seen some writers do that very successfully, particularly where they have a sequel in mind. So what's your thoughts on that?
When a writer drops a bomb at the end of the book or the end of a chapter, and it depends what kind of bomb it is. I won't say what book I just read, but I just finished a book where I was so bitterly disappointed in the ending that it was a real cliffhanger. It could have went one or three ways, and I just thought it was it left me angry. It left me. I said, I just read 400 pages of this book, and I don't have a satisfying ending. So I guess it could backfire on you, because that was my you know, it didn't leave me wondering. It left me frustrated.
Interesting. Yeah. How about you, Stuart?
I prefer to have a little bit of wonder what's going to happen next, you know, in any book I read. So it kind of keeps you interested in the subject matter. You know, if there's some, you know, again, I read all kinds of books. I love biographies. You know, that isn't exactly nonfiction. You know, but I like to read those to know what makes people tick, what makes people tick. But I also, you know, the nonfiction books that I've read, you know, some of them wonderful ones, like Stephen King and all the horror stuff. Those things, I read all of his books when I was in my youth. You know, they were fantastic and spooky, scary, and you didn't know where it was going to go half the time. It had some wonderful ends. You know, I like a good comedy / dramatic piece as well. One of my favorite books of all time is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kersey. If you've ever read that, it is. I think it should be required reading for people, because it kind of makes you challenge your own internal thoughts and what you should do or not do or whatever. And it was pretty darn funny. And then, you know, had some very heavy dramatic parts as well. But it wasn't just slapstick. It was really a worthwhile read. And you know, and again, for me, I couldn't turn the pages fast enough to see what was going to happen next. You know, and again, several hooks in there. But in fact, I told my own son, I said, this is a book you should read when you're like 17 or 18 years old. So it kind of gets you in, not everything in the world is cookie cutter. And there's going to be some curveballs along the way. And of course, that story had a ton of them. But it had several twists where you didn't know where it was going to go. And I like that. If a book really doesn't have those, I will still read them, but I prefer something that keeps me guessing. I love that in movies also. 90% of the movies that I watch, I know how they're going to end just by watching it. The ones that I love the most are when there is a crazy twist at the end. It's like, whoa, I did not see that coming. That movie, No Way Out, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, No Way Out.
I agree with you, Stuart. If as I'm reading the book, and they're dropping bombs throughout, and at the end of chapters that keeps you turning pages, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see what happens. But and I guess it depends on what kind of book it is. If it's an emotional journey book and sort of leaves you wondering, that's fine. Or a life lesson book, a book with a strong moral that gets you to think more on how you're living your life. I think that's great as well. So I don't need a hard stop to every story, but when there are a lot of breadcrumbs dropped and you get to the end, none of them are answered, and then the book just kind of says the end, it's like, no.
Yeah. One of my favorite.
I need to tie it up.
One of my favorite stories of all time is The Sting, right? Everybody remembers that movie. And that thing was full of twists the entire way, as you recall. And it kind of worked for the audience. And I think you're right, because it started with twists and it kept going with twists. But I'm always fascinated by the story that's got the out of left field turn at the end, right? And where you never see it coming, but it kind of sets up the next book for them or the next story for them. It's almost TV like.
It just aired one on PBS, Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders, but I actually read the book, and that was just like that. I mean, a lot of suspects, a lot of twists and turns, and at the end, boy, I did not see the ending coming. It was wonderful.
Yeah, there's some like that, and some of them are real life. You don't see it coming, because I think we've got a situation out in Idaho that's going to be ripe to be written as a fiction novel. There's no suspect, no motive, nothing. It's almost occurred like you would see as in a plot, right? And where's the police going to take it? I don't think anybody knows yet. But so I go down the list of types of fiction, and none of us have written about horror. I mean, you had horoscope, but it wasn't really horror. And you've written romance, and
right.
And I've had my next book is a psychological thriller. So if you were writing a horror story today, how would you begin it, Ceil?
I would use the same process of just creating a horrific scene to open it with, and then just keep creating a character and insert things. So a horrific murder that has maybe a supernatural or a paranormal type feel to it. You could bring in elements of that. I don't know. Horror is definitely not my thing, but it's interesting to even think about, of laying on, who could have done this murder when it didn't look like it was of this earth.
Yeah, that's interesting. What about you, Stuart? Let's take it even a step. How do you make it more bizarre?
Bizarre.
Something that's not even.
I don't know. I love flashbacks. I mean, you could start it in the middle of, depending if it's a single event or if it's a multiple serial killer type thing where you could have a piece of it that is pretty vivid, that's going to take place later on in the story, to kind of have a huge hook right from the get-go. It doesn't really develop characters. It takes you on a roller coaster, right? It hits you right in the face. Whoa, this is what's going on. And then kind of take a few steps back to develop the foundation of the story itself. I love flashbacks. I love them in movies. I love them in books. You don't have to give away the store, but you could set the tone rather quickly. And I love twists. I do. I think like we were just talking about it a few minutes ago. I know just about how every movie I see is going to end. When the ones that throw a curveball, I have no idea of it, they grab me. And I know we've got things. I've got a couple of other stories in my head that I'm going to put down on paper, and I love a good twist, a good thing where you don't know where it's going to end, but it's got to end somehow. And at the same time, if it's a horror story, let's not forget it's got to be a little scary. One of the scariest books, in fact, I think the scariest book I have read is The Exorcist, which is also the scariest movie I've ever seen. I mean,
Yes.
have you guys ever read the book? The
Yes.
book, believe it or not, would you say it's scarier than the movie? I thought it was.
It was terrifying.
It was.
Yeah. You're interested when you're saying that you can actually start with a scene of and then through a series of flashbacks trying to come up with the reason in a horror movie, like everyone in a small town wakes up without one of their senses. They're all deaf, or they all can't speak.
Oh yeah.
Or and then there was some mysterious character that had come through, and they're trying to communicate on, who was this person, and could they possibly be, responsible for? Yeah, it's interesting. You can make your imagination go wild.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. There was that one movie, Blind, where a futuristic society, most of the population lost their sense of sight. So it was kind of an interesting plot like that. But what about those books that start at the end, and then they build a story looking backwards, either the backwards forward or progressively backwards? What are your thoughts on those?
One of my favorite books, and one of the first books that left an amazing impact on me as far as the writing and the world, this was Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. And she starts out, I think the opening line is, "I had a dream of Manderley last night." So, and Manderley was the haunted seaside mansion, estate. And, Maximilian was the brooding owner, that was a tormented soul. And he had Mrs. Danvers, who was the creepy housekeeper that was very a morbid character. And the ghost of his Maximilian's dead wife, Rebecca, sort of just oozed from the walls of this estate. But she starts out the story at the end, and then she brings you through. It was masterful. It was absolutely masterful.
What are your thoughts, Stuart?
I think it's an interesting concept, but I don't know if I want to know the entire end right from the beginning. I would like a lot of intrigue about what might be how things end, but I don't want to know the A to Z. I prefer to see a piece of what may be going on, and then you read of all the particulars of it. So. But I could see, if you've got, say, a horror concept, somebody could be visiting a graveyard, and somebody has passed away, and who knows how, whatever, and that could kind of be rewound, with all the details of what ended up to that point. It could be somebody escaping, in a car driving out of a town after they've done bad stuff, or being chased by, or the police chasing somebody. And it's like, wow, how does this thing end? Or, what's going on to create such angst and excitement of how it's gonna end. But again, like I said earlier, I love the use of flashbacks, but I don't necessarily want to put all the cards on the table. With that being said, I'm sure, just as Ceil just mentioned, there's a lot of good examples out there of how that type of genre and format works. So
yeah, I like to use I like to use time shifts when I write. You call them flashbacks, where you kind of reverse set the scene, through the chapter you're on by talking about something that occurred in the past. They're pretty effective. So, next question. I think I read somewhere that everybody's got one book in them, but only like 5% of the population have two or more. Now, you've written several, right? But was it harder to write the second, the third, and now you're working on the fourth? And still, you've done one.
No, it's a 3-book sequel that I wrote about the fictitious village of Stonehenge, and Arthur and Anna Felicia and Constance. But the second book was much easier. It just I left it off where there was a little bit of an intrigue on where it would go, and I was able to. It was much easier with the sequel. And the third book almost wrote itself, because I just knew the beginning, the middle, and the end. Where before, the first book was the whole creating process and creating the world and creating the characters and who was who, but that was all established. In the third book I had so much fun with the third book. It almost wrote itself.
Yeah. And what about you, Stu? You got one in there, and you got another one in you?
I have 3 more right now that I've got in my head that I need to gear up and put them on paper. And again, for me, the process is, what do you want to say, and then get a backbeat to it. And for me, it's a strong outline, a beginning, a bunch of things, and the end. And the concept for me, I like themes, of underlying themes. The next one I write is going to be the underlying theme of friendship. What would you do for a friend? We all have friends. Some of them, a lot of us have diverse friends, and some have greater issues than others, and get into trouble or not or whatever. What would you do for a friend? That's the unconscious theme of it. And again, to have some fun along the way. But I have a couple of other darker stories that that I have a concept for both already in my mind. And what I try to do with these is to have, thinking, has it been told before? And if it hasn't, I like that. That's appealing to me. Try to, the book about the friendship thing. I'm sure there's a lot of, books on friendships and things, but I don't know if the twists that I plan are in that same, on paper, if you will. And so, like I said, I have 3 more in my head. I need to gear up and start putting them on paper, and I absolutely will. So, and I never heard that statistic. What was it? 90% of everyone has 1 book in them, but 5% write it. Was that stat?
No, and
That's
5% have a second. Yeah. I mean, there's just a huge drop off. Everybody can write 1 book. Not everybody does, but everybody can have 1 book. But only like 5% of the population can do a second book, right? and not that they do even get to the first, but I read that somewhere or heard it
That's
someplace.
surprising.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Interesting.
there's a lot of people write one book, and it's kind of like, and they get it out there.
Mhm.
I wrote the first one, and now I've got the second one I've written. It's hopefully it's going to be out in the spring. We missed the Christmas window, and I've already got the
Mhm.
third one that I'm working on.
How are you?
Huh?
Oh, that's
Yeah, the
nice.
third one's already written.
Okay, can I take an opportunity, Ralph, to talk about my fourth book?
Absolutely, because
Okay,
it's kind of
so
different than the first three, right?
I'm leaving the romance genre, and I'm going into sort of a mystery, and it's called Between the Sweetness and the Sorrow. And so I'm just going to let the first few lines tell you about the story. Okay, so it starts out saying, "It seems an unlikely day for death to come knocking, although death always creeps in silently when Gideon least expects it, like the perfect spring morning when the plantation owner murdered his ma, or his wife's birthday when she caught a bullet meant for somebody else. For some time now, he's seen danger sniffing at Lillian's heels, but he refuses to think about that today. Today, he focuses on one thought: there's still time to outwit death." So that is the opening of my fourth book. It's a mystery about a mysterious white woman who moves into Harlem. It's 1941. She opens a music shop, and she befriends a saxophone player. And she doesn't talk about herself. The community really embraces her. She loves everybody there. She becomes a part of the community, but she's very mysterious. You ask her questions about her past, she shuts you down. And she takes these mysterious trips, and she shows up back up home like injured, wincing, or limping. No one can get anything out of her. And then she disappears. The book opens that she has been missing for 19 days.
Wow.
And her friend Gideon, who has a lifelong friend who owns a jazz club with him in Harlem, they know they have to go looking for her. And she turns out, they found out through the years, she never would admit it, that she's a famous female trumpeter from New Orleans. And she disappeared from there as well. It was very mysterious, when she disappeared from there. So they're going to start their search there. And that's the opening of the book.
Wow. So you're getting more into the thriller genre now.
It is. It's a thriller. It's a mystery. It's a fun story. It's a period piece. I shouldn't say fun. It's intriguing, with great, richly developed characters, and to Stuart's, it has a really strong sense of friendship and community, and what people will go, what lengths they will go to help this woman, and how the community rallies around it, and they find out that they're entering into very dangerous territory and looking for this mysterious woman, and they have to make the decision: are they willing to put their life on the line? So it gets interesting really quick.
I love the verbiage.
Sounds good.
And
Can't wait for it to be done.
Yes, it feels like you said it's a period piece, and I think you said, did you say 1940s, 1941-ish or something?
Yeah,
It's
19
Or
19, the
not?
summer
Maybe
of
I'm
19. Yeah, it's Harlem, the summer of 1941, and the first chapter is "Where is Lillian Johnstone?" And it says 1941 Harlem, New York. And then at some point they leave Harlem, and they have to go into New Orleans, the Vieux Carré, and find her.
I love the verbiage feels 1940s to me. Catch a bullet, outwit death. Catch a bullet. You don't. That almost feels like James Cagney.
It was on purpose because I'm trying to capture the era. So thank you.
She did it. She did exactly what she wanted to do.
So
anyway, final thoughts. What's well, you've already talked about what's next. Stuart, what's next? You're gonna get that book out?
I am. I'm gonna need about 12 months to do it. But I've got the frame, I've got the action, what I'm going to do. And from my process, I need to fill in the blanks along the way. And the discipline for me is to set excuse me, to block off time, and fill in each of the following chapters / scenes along the way, and to knock it out that way. That's how I wrote my first one and plan to write my second one. So, and again, number 3 and number 4 is going to be a change to darker, and they are going to be some crime serial killer types things. I don't want to say too much more about it, but there's going to be, like I said, I love a good twist, and I have a couple of good twists in those 2 stories, which I think are going to blow some people away. So that's my plan, and I do love the fact that you brought that stat out, because that just gives more impetus to finish and do. Number 2.
Good luck, Stuart.
I've got one story that I've got. Actually, I've written it as well. It's called Alone, and I always wonder, and this may date back to a funeral you and I went to, where it was an older guy. I think he was in his 90s. I forget who he was related to, but the church was empty. But you imagine back that when his friends started dying 20, 30 years earlier, the church would have been packed. So when he dies, he's alone because he's the last man standing, right? And so this story is a backdrop of a guy's going to a funeral, his last remaining friend alive from childhood, and then he reflects back on what led to that point in his life and how he got there. It's kind of, so it's not the normal stories that you would think about, but that would be the 4th one if I can get that far. I want to get the 3rd one out.
That's a good concept, because you're yeah, no, but if you have a funeral and no one's there, that's a statement in itself. That's a statement of is there anyone else caring about that person?
Well, yeah, I know, but it's not necessarily a sad statement. He just outlived everybody that was in his life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what do you do? And how does he feel about that? And the people around him, and then that's where the whole reflection backwards comes
in. Sounds like a great opportunity for a lot of a poignant story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's one of those that's mostly written, just not concluded. But anyway, that's where we are. So final thoughts, Ceil?
Well, thank you, Ralph.
Kernels for the audience.
Kernels for the audience. Okay, here's a fun thing that we can end on. So you review writers and who turn out novels. And so back in, I don't know if you remember this, Y2K, and I'm not sure who, I don't know who actually brought this to mind, whether it was some news media or whether it was like Time Magazine or whatever. But back in the year 2000, somebody in the world was going to decide on what was the most important and influential invention of that impacted man. Do you remember that? And do you remember what they decided on?
Boy, in the year 2000,
and it was the most influential invention of all time.
Had to be the internal combustion engine.
Stuart, do you have a guess?
I do. The internet?
No.
I know. There's been.
It was Gutenberg's printing press impacted mankind And I remember when they announced it, because I was guessing things like the internet, the wheel, the car, the electric light. And when they said that, I remember just like internally smiling, thinking, you got that right. Because the power of the written word and be able to have an invention to disseminate it for all sorts of uses, education, information sharing, op-eds. It was just phenomenal. But I thought that was a tribute to your show, Ralph, because all these books are
It's
printed.
amazing how many people are out there writing, and I've got I think in the last year I received over 50 books, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
The amount
Well,
of books.
congratulations. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to get on your show.
Mm-hmm.
It's been fun. It's been fun, and we're enjoying it. But Stuart, how about you? Final thoughts for the folks?
I think like you said, everybody's got a story to tell, and don't be discouraged if you're thinking about writing one. The best thing to do is just figure out what you're trying to say, and just don't make it. It does not have to be perfect. Put something down and keep on moving forward. That's something.
Yep.
We talked about what we do for a living and all that. I was on a fishing boat for a couple of weeks, sailing down from Seattle to San Diego, large vessel, and we had all kinds of obstacles to get this ship to San Diego, and now it's in Panama. And the captain kept saying, "Move forward." So it doesn't have to be moved perfectly forward, but positive action and traction goes a long way. So if you're interested in writing and you've got some kind of story inside of you, it does not have to be a bestseller or win a Pulitzer Prize or anything like that. Put something down and just move forward. And before you know it, you're going to have a lot of distance in the rearview mirror of what you've got, and that will provide momentum to how you finish. So, please give yourself that opportunity if you're thinking about it. And then also, if you need a good Christmas present or holiday present, perhaps conveniently located on Amazon, today's horoscope.
Yes,
Well,
Stuart.
you would be disappointed if I didn't do that. Anyway, I think this
Very
show is
good.
fantastic, and I thank you again, Ralph, for making me part of it. Ralph has always encouraged me, Ceil, to write and do all of this, and thank you. You're a great
Wonderful.
friend.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I thought you would have said that what you wanted to leave the audience with is keep reading and keep writing.
That too. It doesn't hurt to keep reading and keep writing. Keep going.
And keep going.
Thanks.
Just
Mhm.
anyway. Well, great. See, I'll see you next week, the 9th, a week from Friday.
Yes.
And Stuart, I'll see you when I see you. So
Yes. I like that line. So anyway,
Ralph,
I've enjoyed it.
yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. It's always good talking to old friends. All right. Thank you guys. And
thank you. Take care.
All right. Great show. I know
Yeah.
Rebecca couldn't make it, but it was still a wonderful discussion. The fact that Ceil dropped at the very last few minutes about the printing press being the invention of all time in 2000, that was pretty phenomenal. That was impactful.
It was. Okay. So I will see you on the 14th.
Yes, we have a zebra
holiday.
Christmas party.
Yes. Looking forward to it. And everyone, we'll be back on in January. So we'll get the schedule out sometime in December. It'll be in the January Zebra, I imagine. And we'll look forward to that. All right. Thanks,
Yep.
Grace. See you later.
All right. I'll see you, Ralph. Everyone have a good Christmas and a happy new year. And until then, be the good news in someone's life.